Hey, what's up? I'm Jim Bauer from Odyssey BMX, and you're on RideBMX.com, and today I'm going to show you how to install Twombolt cranks. These are Odyssey Twombolt cranks. They're the second version of the Twombolt cranks. The first thing that everybody notices about them is that they're two-piece, which means your spindle is permanently attached to one of your arms. Not a new idea. It's been done before in BMX. It's been done in road bikes. I'm sure it's been done in mountain bikes. So that's not the major component that makes Twombolt so good. The major component is this wedge cluster. Again, with the Twombolts, one of the newest advances is this new, as you can see, flexible wedge cluster. This wedge cluster is your interface between the arm that comes off and the rest of the cranks. And this tapered wedge cluster is what holds everything together. And now the fact that you have this rubber flexible ring, it means these wedges can do an even better job before. They can move and shimmy and get right into the groove that makes the cranks tight as they can be without breaking or coming apart. People think that if this does break or come apart, the cranks don't work, but it's not true at all. These can all be totally individually inserted as long as you have all 6 wedges in there. Also, the spindle is hollower and the bolt is hollow, making it a little bit lighter. You get a bunch of spacers in there. It doesn't mean you need to use all of them, but you definitely need to use some of them. One of the whole concepts of putting these cranks together is finding out what your bike needs when it comes to spacers. Every single bike is different, like I mentioned before. Every bottom bracket is different. Every bottom bracket bearing set in your bottom bracket is different. So that's why we give you a large selection of spacers so you can get the exact right setup for your bike, no matter how wide you want to run them, how narrow you want to run them. And that's what's going to make the Twombolts stay tight all the time and never loosen up. If your cranks are loosening up on you, that means you probably don't have enough spacers in it. You should probably add one more thin spacer, and that should probably solve your problem. Spacers also come with the bottom bracket. That doesn't come with the cranks. So you're going to have a surplus of spacers when you're done. No one's going to use every single spacer, but there's just more for you to be able to customize it with. You have to put your sprocket on first with 2-piece cranks, because obviously after your sprocket on, you put it through the bottom bracket. So one of the first things you got to do is put your sprocket on. We have this 28-tooth Federal sprocket to show you guys how it works. Now with Twombolts, it already has the race built in. All sprockets will come with an adapter to fit them on 22mm or 19mm cranks, but with Twombolts you don't need that. So you basically throw this piece out and you just put this on there. All sprockets are different, so they're all going to go on there a different way. This one has paint on it, so it looks like it's going to need a little bit gentle tapping. So we're going to just throw it in our vise and then just tap on our sprocket. Now you want your sprocket bolt holes on your sprocket to line up so you can put your sprocket bolt in first before you start hammering it on, just so you don't have to do it later. Don't tighten it all the way. Just get it in there so now the sprocket is lined up to where it wants to be. A few gentle taps with a rubber mallet or guarding it so you don't scratch your paint will get your sprocket on there. Now you just tighten this up by hand. Just tightening it up the rest of the way. You can do this at any point after you start to install the cranks, but I like to do it now just so I don't have to do it later. You never know how many spacers you're going to need, but you have to put the right amount of spacers to A, make sure your crank arms don't hit your frame, and B, make sure your chain alignment is all right. Usually you only need very few on the drive side, which is the sprocket side. You only need a very few just to keep it away from the bottom bracket, because a sprocket takes up a lot of room. This dust cover or any number of these spacers will go on the opposite of the drive side, the non-drive side, to take up the space that the sprocket would. So typically you only need one fat one, maybe one skinny one. One skinny spacer is enough to keep it away from your frame and keep your chain lined up correctly. Like I said, every frame is different, so this is going to be something you're going to have to measure and kind of trial and error when you put your bike together. Now that you have your spacers in there, it's time to push the spindle all the way through. Every frame is different, so depending on how well the two sides of the bottom bracket line up is going to be how hard or how not hard it is to push your spindle through. So again, it's going to be a gentle tapping of a rubber mallet, and how hard you do it is depending on how good your bearings are seated and how good that your frame is all lined up with one another. So This one's going in pretty easy, so Federal did a pretty good job of making their bottom bracket straight. So now we're ready to put the drive side on. Probably should have also greased the spindle, which I didn't do, but you guys won't forget to put grease on it like I will, so I'm just pointing it out just to show you guys how easy it is to do it wrong. You want to make sure when you're putting Twombolt cranks together that this tapered edge, your hexagon flats, are covered up by your spacers. You could either use this dust cover, which definitely covers up this edge and all the hexes, or if you'd rather use the spacers that came with your bottom bracket and came with your crankset, each one will work. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of personal preference. This is called a dust cover because it keeps a little of the dirt out, and I think it looks better. But you can easily just use spacers if you'd rather do that. As long as you are covering up this edge on your hex, you're good to go. If you put too few spacers on it, when the wedge cluster goes on and the arm goes on, it'll tighten up against the flats in your spindle, and it won't be all the way flat. So as long as you cover up this edge, that should be fine. So we're going to use a dust cover on this one because it looks better. You got this tie prep, this finish line tie prep in your Twombolts for a reason. Everything goes together better with grease. So, and this is nice kind of copper slip-esque type grease that you're going to put on your wedge, and more grease the better. It doesn't hurt to have grease on everything, and you really can just wipe off any excess you have. It's better to have more than it is to have too little. So basically anywhere metal touches metal in here is just going to make your cranks work smoother, hold tighter for longer, and just perform better in every way. So we're going to put a little bit of grease on each one of these flats. Make sure each one gets a little bit. And also, any face that comes in contact with metal is going to need it. So you want your threads in there. You want the face of your spindle that's going to intersect with your bolt. You want to have grease on that too. I'm obviously using a lot of grease to illustrate that. You can always take grease out later, but you can't put it in after you put your bike together and you don't have it. The new wedge cluster with its rubber gasket, it's a rubber ring, should just stretch right onto there. Slide right on, no problem. Now you can see I got more faces here that don't have grease on them. Those need a little bit of grease too, because those are coming in contact with your other arm. So I'm going to throw some grease on every face. Spread it around a little bit, and you should be good. All right. Now all we do is throw our mating arm right on, no problem. One major thing is make sure they're at 180 degrees from each other. I've done it more than once where you've put both crank arms in the same way, put them 90 degrees to each other. It doesn't ride as well when they're not 180. So put your arm on opposite the other one, install your bolt. Same thing like I said before, everything that comes in contact with metal on metal is better to have grease on it. So you want to put some grease on this edge, because this edge is going to spin around up against the end of your crank arm. It's only going to be easier for you to tighten, and you're going to be sure you have it as tight as you can. A little bit of grease on all the threads helps it work better, and then it helps them not seize. If you put this together and then never touch your bike, leave it out in the rain, this grease is going to save you later on when you have to come take your bike apart. People want to know how tight you're supposed to make your cranks. This bolt can go as tight as you want. The wedge cluster is what's keeping everything together, but this bolt is what's keeping it all. After you get it locked, it's what's keeping it together. So, I mean, I wouldn't use a 5-foot breaker bar. So any Allen key that you can get, you're going to be able to tighten it enough. So that should be as tight as we need it to be. So wipe some of the grease off. So after you've put your cranks together, you want to make sure that you put all your spacers in correctly. You want to have the same amount of space on each side of your bike. See how close my crank arm is? And you want it to be as close as you can get to the other side. As you can see, this one's probably a tiny bit more. If I really wanted it to be anal about it, I could put another spacer on the other side and spread the other one out. But as far as bikes go, this is pretty dialed. If you put your cranks together and you go ride them, and as soon as you go to ride them, there's a little bit of play in there, that means you didn't put enough spacers in. That means even though this bolt might be all the way tight, you might think the bolt is all the way on, you're running up against that flat edge of the spindle and you didn't put enough spacers in here. This one definitely has it, so we don't have to do that. But if that ever happens and you feel like your crank's coming loose, you probably don't have enough spacers. But at the same time, if you use too many spacers, then this arm and the wedge cluster will not have enough of your spindle that it's holding onto, and it's going to come loose. It's kind of a guessing game a little bit when you put your cranks together, but for the most part, if you follow as close as I did, you should be pretty dialed. But like I said, there's always problems, and when people have questions, you can go to OdysseyBMX.com, ask any question you like, and we'll help you figure it out. There's also a pictorial of what I just did, probably way more in depth and way better than I did, on OdysseyBMX.com. And now you can go to Ride to get all your information about putting your bike together in RideBMX.com.